It's summer 1964 in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on board the Cunard liner RMS Queen Mary. Basil Smallpeice looks out over the choppy seas. The 57-year-old grips the railings with one hand and straightens his thick, round glasses with the other. Basil has recently been named to the Cunard board after a long career in the airline industry, and he's decided to make this transatlantic crossing to get a feel for his new employer. The journey is proving rougher than expected, though, so he tries to remain calm in front of the Cunard executive next to him, a stocky man in his 40s named Stanley. Stanley seems to be handling the weather with much greater ease. I say, "Are you all right, Basil?" "Oh, yes, quite all right. I rather thought summer would be a bit calmer, though." "Well, they do say the Atlantic has two moods, tempestuous and tyrannical." "It's even worse when she was first built, would you believe? She didn't have stabilizers then. Used to roll like a pig." The liner shudders as its prow bursts through another huge wave. A spray of salt water soaks Basil. "Ugh, you know what? I think I've seen enough of the deck for now. Let's go inside, shall we?" Stanley leads Basil through the door and into the ship's interior. And to Basil's delight, it's warm and dry. The two shed their coats and make their way down the hall into one of the ship's grand lounges. They take seats near a stage where a pianist plays jazz. "Well, Basil, leaving aside the tempestuous Atlantic, what do you think so far?" "Well, the staff are top-notch, of course, but I expected that. The cabins, though, I was pleasantly surprised by. You'd never know the ship is nearly 30 years old. The food is excellent. I'm just afraid I may have trouble keeping it down." "Well, you'll get your sea legs working here, that's for sure. Can we talk numbers?" Please, numbers are solid. I know where I am with numbers." Stanley produces a small notebook from his pocket and flips to a page in the middle. "Just to go over some broad industry figures, in 1957, 1 million passengers crossed the Atlantic by sea. Ships were still beating airplanes back then, if you can believe it. This year, though, the estimate is around 700,000. That's right, and falling fast. You only need to look around this lounge to see that. Empty tables, idle staff. Yes, jet planes are winning, I'm well aware. I'm partially responsible for that problem. Well, so, on to more Cunard-specific numbers, and if you weren't off your lunch already, you soon will be, because currently our annual losses on the passenger business sit at about £3 million a year." Basil's eyes widen. The losses would be equivalent to nearly $84 million today. Stanley quickly tries to cushion these appalling figures. But the cargo side is more positive. It's growing for one thing. It now represents 60% of our business. And what are the profits there? Estimated £2 million this year. So not enough to make up for the losses then. No. The ship lurches again. Basil feels sweat begin to bead on his forehead and a growing sense of nausea. He needs to excuse himself, so he gets unsteadily to his feet. "Well, Stanley, thanks for the chat and the tour. Let's resume this later." "Of course. Are you sure you're all right? You look a little green around the gills." "I'll see you at dinner." Basil extends a clammy hand and Stanley shakes it. "It won't always be this rough." "You mean the sea or our finances?" "Well, both, I hope, now that you're here." Basil Smallpeice couldn't help but fear that saving Cunard's business might be a hopeless endeavor. His experience aboard the Queen Mary made him doubt that many people would ever choose to travel by sea when faster and more comfortable planes were available. But Basil wasn't one to give up easily. Cunard's old business model might be failing, but as far as Basil was concerned, that just meant it had to find a new one. From Wondery, I'm Lindsay Graham, and this is Business Movers. Before his death in 1865, company founder Samuel Cunard lived long enough to see his shipping firm transform trade on the North Atlantic. By embracing the new technology of steam engines, Samuel established a regular mail service across the ocean that more than doubled the speed of communication between Britain and North America. And his ships did not just transport the mail, they carried passengers as well. Samuel soon had competition from other shipping companies eager to meet the growing demand for transatlantic travel. But Samuel's first mover advantage and his close ties to the British government ensured that Cunard maintained its dominant position in the market. It was a position that the company held onto for decades after Samuel's death. The Cunard Line survived 2 world wars and an economic depression, and over the years the firm's ships grew larger, more comfortable, and much faster. By the early 1950s, an Atlantic crossing could take just 3.5 days. At the same time, though, a new technological threat was beginning to emerge. There were already propeller planes that could cross the ocean faster than a steamship, but an even more advanced type of passenger aircraft was coming, one which would herald a new age of transport in the skies. For over 100 years, Cunard had reaped the benefits of being at the cutting edge of technology. Now, though, they were the ones whose comfortable business model was about to be disrupted. And it was an accountant named Basil Smallpeice who would eventually take on the challenge of correcting Cunard's course. But over a decade before Basil took the helm, he would first play a critical role in ushering in the very thing that threatened to kill off Cunard, the era of jet airliners. This is the second episode in our 4-part series on Cunard, containing the Comet. It's May 2nd, 1952 at London Heathrow Airport, 12 years before Basil Smallpeice's journey on the Queen Mary. From a crowded observation point, Basil looks across the asphalt at an impressive silver airplane getting ready for takeoff. The British-built Comet is about to make history as the world's first commercial jet airplane. 45-year-old Basil is the financial controller of the plane's owner, the British Overseas Airways Corporation. He was instrumental in convincing his colleagues at BOAC to purchase the Comet. Now Basil watches nervously as the aircraft prepares for its inaugural flight with paying passengers on board. Sitting beside Basil among the crowd of well-wishers and company officials is another BOAC accountant named William. "Basil, I'm not sure I've ever seen you nervous before. Well, if this plane has to land early or turn around or, God forbid, fails for any other reason, you think we'll get the details today as to why? I want to be as transparent with the press as possible." "You're already preparing a speech in case it crashes?" "Oh no, that's been prepared for weeks. I'm just wondering if the engineers will be able to diagnose a problem straight away." "Basil, I worry about you sometimes." "Oh, why's that?" "Thinking of every possible scenario the way you do, I don't think it's healthy. It's simply good accounting." "This is not accounting, this is history, Basil. A celebration. Why don't you relax and enjoy the moment?" Basil turns his gaze from the plane to William, smiling. He removes his glasses and wipes them on a handkerchief produced from his pocket. Then he stretches his neck and shoulders and looks at William again. "There. Happy? Well, you fake a sense of ease with the best of them, I'll say that. The Comet is a marvelous machine. She'll be fine. And when she proves that, I'll throw out my script for the press conference." All heads snap in the direction of the plane as the engines fire. The Comet taxis briefly before making a right turn, pausing, and then speeding down the runway. Basil doesn't show it, but his heart beats nearly out of his chest. Then the plane lifts off and soars into the air, and the crowd cheers. As the plane grows tiny against the blue sky, a sense of relief permeates everyone around except Basil. William is the only one who notices. "Well, we're off. Can't you be happy now? Tear up that script?" "I'll be happy when the thing lands. Till then, I'm keeping hold of the script." A little less than 24 hours later, Basil Smallpeice could finally relax. BOAC's Comet landed safely in Johannesburg, South Africa. The age of jet travel had officially begun. But Basil would soon learn a hard lesson, that technological revolutions were not always without victims. The Comet may have been faster than any other passenger plane in the sky, but it was not invulnerable. Basil Smallpeice had started at the British Overseas Airways Corporation, BOAC, in 1950, 2 years before the first commercial flight of the Comet. The nationalized company was then transitioning from providing air transport services for the British government to operating as a commercial passenger enterprise. One of Basil's first tasks as controller was to carve out a path for achieving the company's long-term goal, to end BOAC's reliance on government grants and financial support. To determine the financial lay of the land, Basil needed to find the company's break-even point where costs equaled revenues. But BOAC didn't have the accounting tools that Basil was used to from his previous jobs. Prior to Basil's arrival, BOAC had few ways of measuring its financial performance. So Basil decided the best way to correct this was by using a figure called passenger load factor. This was the percentage of aircraft seats on any flight which BOAC needed to sell to avoid a loss. Basil worked out that BOAC's high operating costs meant that it needed to sell 3 out of every 4 seats to break even. But BOAC barely sold 60% of its available tickets. Basil knew that he would need to reduce BOAC's costs so that the break-even point decreased to below 60%. But it was also clear to him that cost-cutting could only go so far. To make a reliable profit, the company also needed to increase its ticket sales. That, however, would be difficult with the company's existing fleet of aircraft. At the time, many BOAC flights were made using Boeing Stratocruisers, an aircraft derived from military planes, powered by 4 noisy and unreliable propeller engines and expensive to operate. A flight from London to New York on a Stratocruiser took about 15 hours, with a 1-hour stop in Newfoundland for refueling and a crew change. This was much faster than a trip on an ocean liner. But tickets on a Stratocruiser were far more expensive for a ride that was often bumpy and noisy. Most travelers still preferred the comfort, elegance, and reliability of ocean liners. So Basil feared there wouldn't be much ability for increasing ticket sales on the Stratocruisers. What BOAC really needed was new planes. And luckily for Basil, the British manufacturer de Havilland had an aircraft under development which seemed to be just what was needed. The Comet was the first passenger plane designed to use jet engines, and its top speed would be 526 miles per hour, considerably higher than the 350 miles per hour that Boeing's Stratocruiser could achieve. The Comet would also fly higher, which meant it would soar above the weather and provide its passengers with a far smoother and quieter ride. So for Basil, it was obvious that BOAC needed to be an early adopter of this new technology. He was sure that jet airliners would grab the public's attention and that whatever company would be the first mover would reap the benefits. If BOAC didn't embrace this new jet age quickly, others would get there first. And then Basil's company would be left with outdated aircraft, ever-increasing maintenance costs, and ever-decreasing passenger numbers. So Basil was delighted when BOAC confirmed its order for the new Comets. Still, he was a worrier by nature, and when Basil witnessed the takeoff of the first commercial Comet flight in May 1952, he struggled to shake off his feelings of dread. That sense of foreboding would be proved correct. In March of 1953, a Comet airplane transporting cargo for Canadian Pacific Airlines stalled shortly after takeoff, resulting in a crash that killed 11 crew members. Even worse news came in May. Exactly 1 year after the first commercial Comet flight, a BOAC-operated Comet departing from India crashed 6 minutes after takeoff, killing all 43 people on board. Then, on January 10, 1954, another BOAC Comet exploded in midair, resulting in the deaths of all 35 passengers. These accidents horrified Basil. BOAC was forced to immediately withdraw all Comets from service. Modifications were made, and the planes returned to the skies in March of 1954. But just 1 month later, another Comet flown by BOAC again exploded in midair, killing all of its passengers. After that, the Comets were withdrawn indefinitely. It would later be determined that the cause of these accidents was metal fatigue, caused by the rapid changes in pressure and temperature during the Comet's high-altitude flights. So now, the once exciting jet planes were grounded and useless to BOAC. In June 1954, Basil was promoted to Deputy Chief Executive, making him all the more responsible for dealing with the crisis. And if BOAC was going to survive, the airline needed to restore its reputation and find new planes. At first, Basil patched up BOAC's fleet with propeller aircraft. He took no joy in what he saw as a step backward, but the company had to keep flying somehow. And while Basil debated with his team what to do next, word came from aircraft manufacturer de Havilland that a new iteration of their jet plane, the Comet 4, would be ready by 1958. De Havilland was confident that this new model would address the fatal flaws of earlier versions. But this news left Basil and the other BOAC executives with a decision to make. There was every chance that the Comet brand was now so toxic that the people would shun the aircraft no matter what improvements were made. But there was also considerable pressure on Basil from the British government to support British industry and buy British planes. BOAC was still owned by the state, so ultimately, Basil and his colleagues felt they had little choice. They caved into the demands of the politicians and put their faith in de Havilland to fix the Comet. Fortunately, when Basil accepted the deliveries of the Comet 4s in 1958, he found the new planes much improved. BOAC was able to offer the first scheduled commercial jet flights between London and New York. And despite Basil's fears about the reputation of the Comets, passengers flocked to BOAC, lured by the quicker trips offered by the new planes. And these new Comets finally delivered the results Basil wanted. In 1959, BOAC's fleet of 10 jet planes sold 74% of their seats, a total of 94,000 passengers, and well above the company's break-even point. The planes were profitable. But far more people were still choosing to cross the Atlantic the old-fashioned way, by sea. But Basil knew change was literally in the air, and was confident that once the safety and convenience of the new technology was accepted by the public, then jet airliners would soon supplant the ocean liners of old. By now, Basil had been made managing director of BOAC, and he didn't want to take any more chances. The failures of the previous Comet model still lingered in the back of his mind, and he was cautious about pinning all of BOAC's prospects on a plane with such a checkered past. So to hedge his bet on the Comets, Basil also began purchasing American Boeing 707 jets. This did not please the British government. Politicians wanted BOAC to buy more British planes instead, such as the Vickers VC-10. But Basil pointed out that they had already placed an order for VC-10s, but the government wasn't satisfied with that and made the company purchase even more. Basil was furious. He completely disagreed with the government's decision. The additional VC-10s would not be ready for 6 years, but BOAC would still be expected to front the cost of their construction. Basil feared the order for additional aircraft would place a dangerous strain on the company's finances. And he was right. The bumper profits of 1959 proved ephemeral. An economic recession cut demand for airline travel. And the drop in ticket sales, combined with the investment BOAC had made in new planes, resulted in huge losses for the company. And worse news was to follow. The construction of the extra VC-10s proved even more costly than predicted. Because it was the British government that had insisted on BOAC purchasing the planes, Basil felt that he should be able to write off the debt incurred as a result, but the government wouldn't allow that. This led to a bitter dispute between Basil and his political masters. Finally, in December of 1963, Basil felt he had no choice but to resign. He was enraged and deeply hurt that his 14-year adventure in aviation was coming to an end in this way. But just as quickly as Basil was forced to leave BOAC, he would be offered a new opportunity. By championing the jet airliner, Basil had sown the seeds of destruction for the ocean liner industry. Now, though, he would get a chance to save it. It's December 1963 in the center of London, 11 years after the first commercial flight of a BOAC Comet. The now 57-year-old Basil Smallpeice lingers in the cold mist and lights a cigarette. He's just wrapped up a board meeting at BOAC, Basil's last. A dispute with the government owners of the airline has led to Basil's resignation. And now, before he heads to the train station, Basil takes a moment to reflect. But after just a few drags of his cigarette, his reverie is interrupted by a voice from behind. "Basil?" Basil turns to see Sir John Brocklebank, the 48-year-old chairman of the Cunard Line. John is almost a decade younger than Basil, but he looks at least Basil's age, if not older. The two men shake hands. "John, this is unexpected?" "Not as unexpected as your news, Basil, leaving BOAC." "I know. Can you believe it? Having grown sadly familiar with our government, yes, I can. Where are you headed?" "Right now, Victoria." "Oh, me too. Let's share a cab." Before Basil can say no, John has raised his hand to hail a car. A gleaming black London taxi swoops in out of the mist, and the two businessmen clamber inside. John leans forward to tell the driver where to take them. "Victoria Station, please." Thanks for this, John." "Not at all. What happened to you is terribly unfortunate. They don't know what they're losing." "That is awfully kind of you. Where will you go now? Do you know? We can't have you just sitting on the sidelines." I've nothing lined up, no." "Say, is Victoria really your station? I thought you lived north." "Oh, you've caught me. Well, I'll confess, I did not come by your office just to wish you luck. I came to offer you a job." "A job, John? The corpse of my last one is still warm." "I know, but I had to get to you before someone else did. I want you to come over to Cunard, join our board. We haven't had a true financial mind at the company in decades, and we've never needed one more. Basil sighs, but John presses on. You're reluctant, I can tell. I'm not reluctant. I'm honored. I'm humbled. Don't say no yet, Basil. But most of all, I'm tired. I understand that, but think what a challenge this would be, though, to help rescue a sinking ship. Sorry for the metaphor, but it's too perfect. It's a very kind offer, John, but I've decided to go away for a few months, recharge my batteries. You understand. I'll certainly think about it, though. Well, please do. And you know, I wasn't a bad cricketer when I was young. I was even selected for England once, Winter Tour of India, 39. But then Hitler decided to invade Poland, and, well, that was that. No time for cricket. I never got the call again. My point here is that in life one never quite knows when opportunity will come or go. We can wait for you, Basil, while you recharge those batteries. Just don't leave it too long. Then John leans forward. You can drop me off here, driver. John turns back to Basil. Now you shall give me an answer when you get back. I promise. The taxi slows to a stop, and as John opens the door, a blast of cold air rushes into the taxi. Ugh, this weather. Where are you going, by the way, Basil? Somewhere a little warmer, I hope. Hong Kong. Oh, marvelous. Will you be flying BOAC? You're funny. Absolutely not. When Basil Smallpeice returned home from his vacation in early 1964, he felt rested and ready for a new challenge. He arranged to meet with Sir John Brocklebank and accepted the offer to join Cunard's board of directors. But even though Basil had some idea what to expect at the shipping company, the mess he was about to discover would be even worse than he imagined. The appointment of Basil Smallpeice was not the first time Cunard had tried to secure its future by looking to the airline industry. By the late 1950s, the threat posed by jet passenger planes had become impossible to ignore. Cunard decided that the best way to respond to this disruptive new technology was to diversify and make a bold move out of its traditional shipping business. So in March 1960, Cunard announced it was buying a controlling stake in British Eagle, a small independent airline. It was an expensive gamble, and the newly formed Cunard Eagle Airways was not kindly looked upon by its competitors in the aviation industry. They successfully lobbied the British government to refuse Eagle a license to operate on the lucrative London to New York route. This was a devastating blow for Cunard. With passenger numbers on its ocean liners already plummeting, the company now stood to lose millions of pounds on its new airline venture as well. The British government, though, did not want the embarrassment of the famous Cunard company collapsing on its watch. So a deal was brokered. The British Overseas Airway Corporation would join forces with Cunard's airline division. A new company would be formed named BOAC Cunard. The new arrangement meant Cunard would be less exposed to financial danger, but BOAC would become the dominant partner. Effectively, the deal offered Cunard a path out of the airline business, and they took it. Basil Smallpeice knew all about Cunard's ill-fated attempt at diversification. He had been the managing director at BOAC when the deal with Cunard went through. That meant, however, that when Basil joined Cunard in the spring of 1964, he found the company once again almost entirely focused on its traditional business. At first, Basil was just a director on Cunard's board with no management responsibilities. He spent his early months at the company familiarizing himself with the shipping industry and analyzing Cunard's prospects. But then, in November 1965, Basil's role changed dramatically. Cunard's chairman and chief executive, Sir John Brocklebank, stepped down due to poor health. Cunard's board voted for Basil to fill the position. And suddenly, Basil found himself running the Cunard Line, and he would have his work cut out for him. Cunard was struggling badly. Over the previous 3 years, its passenger business had lost £16 million, the equivalent of over $250 million today. The company had begun selling off assets to survive, and there was little sign of any recovery on the horizon. The losses were most acute aboard the company's two sister flagships, Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth. The grand red, white, and black ocean liners were expensive to operate. That wasn't such a problem when the luxury suites and cabins on board were selling out. But now, though, it was common for the liners to cross the Atlantic with more crew than passengers. There was a solution in the works at Cunard, though, a new ship codenamed Q4. The Q4 would have a higher passenger capacity, but would be lighter and cheaper to operate than the two Queens that preceded it. Its sleek design would be capable of both crossing the hazardous North Atlantic and making shorter cruises with more frequent stops. The hope at Cunard was that this dual-purpose ship would attract a broad customer base and turn a profit all year round. But the Q4 was years away from completion. Basil had to find a faster way to improve Cunard's bottom line. And like the shrewd accountant he was, Basil decided to focus first on reducing costs. It wasn't just a fleet of aging liners that was driving Cunard into the red. Little at the company's offices had changed in decades. The placid atmosphere reminded Basil more of an old-fashioned bank than a modern transportation company. Everywhere he looked, he saw opportunities to make savings and efficiencies. To implement these changes, Basil knew he would need a driven and capable management team. But Cunard's upper echelons were dominated by older men who had risen through the ranks simply through seniority. Most had little interest in shaking things up the way Basil thought necessary. Fortunately, though, Basil had an almost immediate opportunity to change this dynamic. Cunard's general manager was retiring, and Basil could replace him with a man of his choosing. His pick was Philip Bates. Philip was the nephew of former Cunard chairman Sir Percy Bates and knew the shipping company better than anyone. He was also only 40 years old and had the energy and modern perspective Basil was after. Basil thought he would be willing to take on the job of reforming Cunard's passenger business, and he was right. But Basil didn't just focus on management personnel. It wasn't only a question of who did the work, but where they did it mattered as well. Cunard had long been based in Liverpool, on the northwest coast of England. 600 Cunard staff lived and worked in the city, and all major decisions were made in the company's magnificent offices there. This location had been perfect when Liverpool's docks were the busiest in the world. In more recent years, though, Liverpool had been eclipsed by other ports. Most of Cunard's passenger ships now operated from Southampton, which was on the south coast of England, closer to London and the European continent. But this meant that the Cunard's upper management in Liverpool hardly ever even saw the company's ships. Basil felt this was absurd. The offices of a shipping company should be where the ships were. A relocation was long overdue. Basil knew it would be painful, though. He offered financial assistance for those willing to follow the company south from Liverpool and a compensation package for those who were unable to move. But there were some inevitable layoffs. Basil hated it, but the long-term health of the company was more important. If Cunard collapsed, far more people would be losing their jobs. So with his first major operational decisions made, Basil turned his attention from Cunard's passenger business to the cargo side of things. In the early 20th century, Cunard had acquired two subsidiaries, Port Line and the Brocklebank Line. Port Line specialized in shipping cargo between Britain and Australia. Brocklebank predominantly served the east coast of India. Brocklebank had a capable management team, and in 1965, the company had turned a small profit. So Basil was content not to interfere with operations there for the time being. Port Line was a different story. When Basil dove into the numbers, he found that the company's profits were slipping. This was especially troubling because for much of the early 1960s, Port Line had been Cunard's only profitable division. Clearly, it needed special attention. A typical round trip to Australia took over 160 days. But Basil was astonished to find that only 66% of those days were spent at sea. The rest of the time, Port Line ships were tied up in ports, loading and unloading, and dealing with customs paperwork. In Basil's mind, a ship was no different to an aircraft or a freight train. If it wasn't moving, it wasn't earning. But it wasn't just time the Port Line was wasting, it was space as well. Basil discovered that a high proportion of cargo space on every voyage was going empty. The company was essentially moving large quantities of air from one country to another at a vast expense. Part of the problem was that the Port Line employed little standardization. Different ships were different sizes with different cargo configurations. It meant that consignments that would snugly fit in one Port Line ship would be an awkward squeeze on another. Ships were not easily interchangeable either, so in the event of damage or mechanical issues, Port Line had to keep a wide variety of spare vessels on hand. Like much of Cunard's operation, it was an inefficient and expensive way to run a business. Basil had to find a solution. But at first, he was stymied. He knew even less about cargo shipping than he did about the passenger trade. But then in early 1966, Basil took a trip to the United States. There he would discover that while one new technology was threatening to destroy Cunard, there was another that could provide it with a lifeline. It's spring 1966 in Port Newark, New Jersey. At the water's edge, Basil Smallpeice follows behind Malcolm McLean, a 54-year-old American trucking magnate. Malcolm is giving Basil a tour of a new type of dock made for a new type of cargo vessel, the container ship. Malcolm points to a large, red, industrial-looking ship making its way out of the port, its upper decks laden with hundreds of identical metal containers. Now that was an old oil tanker we bought and converted. Eventually, we'll replace her with a custom-built container ship, but she's working just fine for now. And to tell you the truth, the ships themselves are not that important. What do you mean by that? Malcolm turns around and points at the huge asphalt parking lot next to the dock. No, that's the key to containerization. That's where the real magic happens. The lot behind them is lined with row after row of identical metal containers just like the ones on the ship. Between them are small roads that allow the containers to be moved on wheels. The containers move from ships via crane onto a flatboard transport truck, then into the lot. And when they're ready to move inland, they're loaded onto the back of a semi-truck. Process works in reverse as well. Basil is impressed. He analyzes out loud to Malcolm. Everyone else has been obsessed with decreasing manual labor costs, but that's not really where the money is lost, is it? The brilliance of what you're doing here is that in the ship's turnaround time. That's right. A ship in port is a ship losing money. Couldn't have put it better myself. Basil nods out at the red container ship maneuvering towards the ocean. And how fast can you turn one of those around? 16 hours. You're kidding. Nope. And you can probably work out what that does to our costs. When I started this, loading cargo by hand the old-fashioned way cost more than $5 a ton. These methods brought that down to just over a dime. Oh goodness, our cargo ships spend days in port. I can't even begin to tell you how much it costs. Basil slowly rotates on his feet, taking in the full scale of the container terminal. He's sold on the concept. Well, I don't suppose you'd want to consult for my company, help out the competition? I wouldn't have met you here if I was afraid of competition, because look, Basil, this whole thing only takes off if it becomes the new standard. The reality is, I need container terminals all around the world. I need Cunard on board, and everyone else for that matter. So you go back to England, spread the word. I will certainly do that, Mr. McLean. Now, what else can I say? Where do I sign us up? Basil Smallpeice returned to London certain that he had just witnessed the next great advance in shipping technology. In fact, he thought it could be as important as when the steam engine replaced sails in the 19th century. Basil was convinced that Cunard had to containerize as soon as possible. It would slash their costs and potentially save the business. But he also knew that converting to this new way of handling cargo would be a long and complicated process. If Cunard was to embrace this new methodology, it would need help. Basil Smallpeice was not the first business leader in the British shipping industry to see the potential in container ships. A year before Basil's visit to New Jersey, Cunard's longtime rival P&O and 3 other British shipping companies had come together to form a new conglomerate named Overseas Containers Limited. They had a head start on Cunard, and Basil thought it would be tough to compete against their combined forces. So Basil decided that the best way forward was for Cunard to join the new collective as well. Basil met privately with leaders of the shipping company P&O to see if there was a way for Cunard to get a slice of the pie. But P&O flatly denied Basil's request. The 4 companies that formed Overseas Containers Limited were determined to crowd out the competition, and they knew Cunard was struggling and had no intention of offering their rival a helping hand. Basil was disappointed, but he refused to sit idly by. He was still dead set on joining the container ship revolution, so he decided to form a conglomerate of his own. He approached 3 other smaller British shipping companies, and together with Cunard, they became Associated Container Transportation, or ACT. The upfront costs of containerization would be considerable, though. New ships would need to be bought or constructed, and specialized docks would have to be built like the one Basil saw in New Jersey. Even with the combined resources of 4 companies, it would take years for the conglomerate to see the benefits. But Basil was certain containerization would pay off. He just had to make sure Cunard was still around when it did. By this time, Basil was just 6 months into his tenure as chairman and chief executive. In that short time, he had slashed costs and overhauled Cunard's management. The company's new flagship, the Q4, was rising above the stocks at the shipyard in Glasgow, and the long-deferred office move from Liverpool to Southampton was finally underway. But despite all Basil's efforts, the fundamentals hadn't changed. Air travel was still growing, and Cunard was still losing money. Basil knew that there was no hope for the company in merely tweaking its old business model. The golden age of ocean liners had passed and was not coming back. Since the emergence of jet passenger plane, there was no way to find profit in running a year-round service on the North Atlantic anymore. Cunard had to adapt or die. And Basil believed that if containerization was the future of the company's cargo operations, then leisure travel was the future of its passenger business. Cruise ships had once been the poor relation of the mighty ocean liner. Now they might be Cunard's best chance at survival. The Q4 was being built with cruising in mind, but a wider overhaul of the company's passenger ships was needed. The Cunard fleet was still dominated by old ocean liners like the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth. These ships were iconic and beloved, but Basil knew they had to go. Despite all the challenges facing Cunard, Basil still believed he could see a course to safety for the ailing shipping firm. He had his strategy in place and hoped to turn the company's fortunes around within the next 3 years. But in May 1966, an unexpected setback would upend Basil's plans and puncture his fragile sense of optimism. A national strike by ship workers in the United Kingdom would shake the entire industry. And this walkout would trap Basil's fleet in port, costing his company millions of pounds and leaving Cunard hanging on by a thread. From Wondery, this is episode 2 of Steering Cunard Off the Rocks for Business Movers. In the next episode, Basil Smallpeice and Cunard face a strike so devastating that the British government declares a state of emergency. If you'd like to learn more about Basil Smallpeice and Cunard, we recommend Of Comets and Queens by Basil Smallpeice, The Only Way to Cross by John Maxton Graham, and Transatlantic by Stephen Fox. A quick note about our dramatizations. In most cases, we can't know everything that happened, but all our reenactments are based on historical research. Business Movers is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsay Graham, for Airship. Audio editing by Mohammed Shazib. Sound design by Molly Bach. Music by Lindsay Graham. Additional writing for this episode by Cody Hoffmuck. Associate producer Jake Sampson. Executive producers are William Simpson for Airship and Aaron O'Flaherty, Jenny Lauer-Beckman, and Marshall Louie for Wondery.